Welcome to Shine in the Light. My name is S.E. Wallebo, and today we have a great guest. But first, please wear your mask right here and practice social or physical distancing. Avoid large groups if you can. So today we're discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the African economic leadership that cares, the state of trade in Africa. Is technology a key to moving forward? And our guest today is the one and the only Bogolo Joy Kenewendo. She is African economist with expertise and experience in trade and investment policy, industrial development policy, macroeconomic policy, public finance management, regulatory frameworks and reforms, and private sector capacity building and development. Delivered projects and consultancies for government, including Botswana, Ghana, Rwanda, international development partners such as World Bank, DFI, Southern African Development Community, United Nations Development Program, and private sector companies like Botswana and Botswana Stock Exchange. She is a former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry for the Republic of Botswana, successfully led the transformation agenda for the ministry aligned with the National Transformation Strategy, which included digitizing and reforming public service delivery. Introduced a strategic, purposive Apex model, chaired and concluded the post-Brexit agreement with the United Kingdom, the Joint Council Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, as well as the National Doing Business Reforms Committee. Gender and youth activist, active for 15 years, advocating for the inclusion of young people in decision-making in Botswana and the rest of Africa. Served as Botswana's first youth representative to United Nations, lobbied and subsequently passed legislation towards the protection of children and women's rights. How are you, Bogolo?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you, Sonny? And what a long introduction.
Yeah. We want to make sure that we got it in. So a lot of people have been introspecting since COVID-19 hit. You know, some people are depressed by it, some don't care, some don't believe it. So how you been coping with this?
Well, I've been doing quite well, I think, and mainly because, last year, at the end of last year, I decided to take a sabbatical, take a year off and just take care of myself and take care of my family, connect with things that matter. And it just so happened that everyone now is being forced to do the same, albeit others have to work from home and not necessarily take a sabbatical. So it's been really great for me. And it just so happened at the same time when COVID hit various economies that, my expertise were being sought after around the world. So I've had to then start Kenewendo Advisory, which really, like I mentioned, was in the plan last year. And it has kept me busy. But the good thing that I like about it is I am much more in control of my time and how I want to use it and who I want to give it to. And I think I think you may have seen this in my emails as well, that I'm quite deliberate and protective of my time. Yes. And how are you doing?
I'm doing. We're holding. A lot of businesses out here, are closed. People lost their jobs and so forth. But people are hopeful. People are resilient. So I think we're gonna come out of this situation pretty strong. Bogolo, before we go, Bogolo, before we go deep into issues, I want to salute you because you are such an inspiration to me and to many others. And obviously, you come across as somebody who has a deep sense of humanity. And moral integrity. Can you talk a little bit about your background? Because I want to know if you grew up knowing your purpose or your why.
What a loaded question.
Yeah, because it seems like you pretty much responding well to your calling. So
one can only hope, Well, my story quite simple. Kenwana Botswana. I was born and raised here in Botswana, and from the small village of Motopi in Boteti area. We are of the water tribe.
Yes, yes, I love that area.
And yeah, and it's quite beautiful this time of the year. And I grew up all over Botswana. I've told the story so many times that I've attended about 11 schools in 7 years, and I've been so fortunate to have good friends at an early age that were inspiring me to think about what it is that I want out of life, and to help me put together a life plan and a vision board before even vision boards were a thing. And what I knew from the beginning, from very early on, was that I wanted to influence policy. I wanted to help people, but I wasn't exactly sure what that would entail. And thank God for Festus Mohaye, who I met when I was 16, and he pushed me in this path of becoming.
He's a great guy. He's a great guy.
He's a fantastic leader, and I will never forget once we were on a trip together. In Copenhagen. Well, he was there as a special envoy to the UNSG for climate change, and I also happened to be in Copenhagen, and I had all these questions about leadership and why he didn't do things as a president and so forth. And when I was 19 at the time, he said to me, "You wait your turn and tell me if it's that easy." and I even when I became a minister, that those words, they really kept ringing in my head. If leadership was an easy thing, and if working for the people, serving the people was an easy thing, and what is it if you had enough of a cushion to keep you going, especially during the tough times where the decisions, the impact of your decisions are not happening as quickly as you would like them to.
Wow, that's wonderful. In your Cape Town TED Talk, you talked about how at times women can distance themselves from supporting each other, and obviously that is not the nurturing that you spoke about or that you talked about. And I'll quote you here. You said, "Let's heal ourselves. Let's heal ourselves of female claustrophobia." That word over there is pretty big for me. Where you just get enraged when someone new comes into your spaces of influence. And so, Bogolo, how can those who are held captive by this mentality be liberated from it? So the women, or the women era, as you coined it, can thrive and succeed.
First, I want to say there's a whole majority of women that support women. This saying that behind every great and successful man, there's a woman. And there's another saying that says behind every successful woman is a tribe of women that are supporting her and encouraging her to lead on. And so while the aspects of my TED Talk that speak to the challenges of women not supporting women, I just wanted to highlight that there's also a great deal of women that are supporting women, and I'll talk about this later on. The likes, some of my mentors are women, and they've been fantastic. But in healing yourself of female claustrophobia, this is something that is very personal. It's a personal journey. That someone has to take in realizing that the notion that there can only be one woman at the top, or that there can only be a certain class of women at the top, is based out of scarcity, and it's not actually based out of reality and a genuine a desire for inclusive growth. And so all I can just ask of someone with that kind of mentality is to realize that there's plenty of space for everyone, and we're all running our races. Everyone has their own lane, and I'm not trying to step on your toes, and I know you're not trying to step on mine, and you actually do not gain anything. Your candle does not shine brighter by turning mine off. It might appear so for a little bit, but
Right.
eventually even your eyes will adjust and see that you have not gained anything. So the challenge for me here is that for everyone, not just women, to ask themselves if they are being an additive, a multiplier towards a more equitable world in leadership, in creating spaces of opportunity versus being a diminisher.
How do you make sure your colleague is not threatened by your success or your ability and capacity to lead, but instead be inspired by it? Because I know for sure it is difficult to exhibit your professional, best, while also at the same time, you're trying to deflect a shade that your college is throwing at you or throwing your
Yeah.
way. So
Yeah, I think first what's important is your team, is ensuring that your team is on board with your vision and what it is that you want to do. And so that is your core team, your immediate team that is on board. It understands the vision and the steps it takes in order to deliver on the vision, and that they understand the impact that all those steps will eventually have on in creating a greater good. And for me, what was so important before becoming a minister, and particularly so during my time as Minister of Investment, was having people buy into the vision of a private sector-led Botswana, private sector-led economy, one that is inclusive, that brings in indigenous knowledge into the economy, SME development, investor attraction, and not only focused on foreign investors, but also really looking at domestic investments, because I thought that was such a crucial part of our development, and also just looking at what is the role that we can play in the greater global economy, looking particularly at the opportunities that are being given by the global supply chains and value chains. So just having people understand that, I felt helped us move a little further in towards delivering what we wanted. And when it comes to colleagues, I again think this is something that is it's a personal journey. Other people feel like they know what they know and it has worked before, and you can't change it, but you focus on those that will be additive to your mission and will also help to spread the word and be multipliers in your vision and in your development. Because just focusing on, say, maybe one person that is really trying to diminish the impact, the vision that you have put together, and potentially your success will also just be very energy draining. So my advice is to be focused, is to remember why we started. The journey will be very difficult, very painful. But if we know where we want to go, and we have some people that want to go there with you, then you have a chance of success. But what's important is your success as a leader is not an individual success. It's a collective success. And it's important to always put that forward.
Great. Talking leadership. So leadership is normally associated with assertiveness, competitiveness, dominance, strength, confidence, and independence, and all these traits that are stereotypically associated with men, right? I'm not sure if these traits, though, make best leaders. Transactional leadership is too bad, but I prefer transformational. That's me.
Transformational, consequential
Yes.
Leadership. Yes.
Yes. And
I actually have. Sorry, go ahead.
No. If you want to chime in, but I was going to finish the my question. And so during the pandemic, we saw the likes of New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, Denmark's Frederiksen, Germany's Angela Merkel, and Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen receiving global acclaim for their responses to the pandemic. And it seems to me that leadership traits are different from the ones associated with some men, not all men, with some men that are leading. Correct me if I'm wrong. So at the same time, we don't want to discredit all men. Like we said before, some have done a lot of for their communities. We have a great COVID task team in Botswana, as you know. And I know that they're doing pretty good job. Even though I wish they could have included some women, but I'm fine with it.
A sprinkle of a sprinkle of women in there.
A sprinkle of what, So, Bogolo, do you think? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I'm waiting for your question. Sorry.
Okay, I say, Bogolo, do you think women make better leaders than men, or do you think men who are in leadership position ought to incorporate some of those traits that women possess?
Well, so first, I don't know who said women are not confident, because I heard in your statement that confidence falls more on the male side and masculine side and not on the feminine. But I'd like to argue.
I think that women are very confident.
I think so too, and the world demands it in order to break through. You have to be confident. You have to be assertive. But it is those other more feminine characteristics that have that bring that added advantage to women in leadership. And I do not subscribe to this pitting men better than women in leadership, or do women make better leaders, and so forth, because I think as in everything, diversity makes things better. So together we make a better leadership team than if it was just a homogeneous group of males or a homogeneous group of females. You need a mixture at the table to ensure that we have both the masculine and feminine qualities that will add value and bring forward the consequential and transformational leadership. Because again, what we're always advocating for is consequential and transformational leadership. It's not just for someone to take up a space and then just use it for their own good via corruption, amongst others.
According to the Institute for Women's Leadership, they say globally, women hold just 24% of senior leadership positions, right? The late Kenyan Nobel Peace Laureate Wangari Maathai said that the higher you go, the fewer women they are. And so, Bogolo, even in this digital economy, men still dominate the space. You have worked for a long time on issues of gender equality and equity, particularly in Africa. So this is a two-part question. Number one, what can you tell us about some strategies or policies in place that have been proposed to position more women for leadership roles or for ownership of companies or some sort, so we can have the millions of the chair bears, the Sheila Close, the Ellen Johnsons, the Graham Michelles, and the millions of the Kenewendos.
I mean, the figure that you just mentioned across Africa, in Southern Africa, it said, and I want to read this real quick, that only 3 of Southern African countries have over 30% of women in economic decision making. And I mean, talking about in political leadership or decision making, it was too dismal. I didn't even want to take the figure because we are essentially not active in political leadership. And there are various reasons why this is so. And it has been, the various studies that have been put forward as to why this is so. Excuse me, I have So I think there are several opportunities for us to work on representation, in economic spaces and political and whatever else space that exists. And, you know, the various protocols that are out there that are encouraging for laws to protect women and children's rights first and foremost.
Right.
Because if your rights are not protected, if you can't drive, if you can't work, if you can't own land, those are some of the bases that if, you know, they're not in place, then it's very difficult for you to become a very active participant in the economy. And then there are a couple of structural and legal obstacles that already exist that need to be dealt with. I mean, I remember last year at some point, I think South Africa changed a law that prohibited land ownership by women or something like that without the husband's approvals. And we know that that was the same here in Botswana. At some time, similarly with financial applications and inheritance law, you know, the famous Ganye case that women can't inherit. And these things are not just in Botswana, South Africa, they're so widespread across the continent that if we don't look at them in the beginning, first and foremost, protection of women and children's rights, then it will essentially just never happen to see an increase of women in decision making. And of course, that those like affirmative action, you know, Margaret Nasha has talked quite broadly about this before, the need for affirmative action to ensure that Parliament at least has a quota of women, and then also in the civil service and so forth. And then in companies, the issues around providing maternity leave, if maternity and paternity leave are not standard as they are not in the US. Then, you know, it makes it very difficult for women to want to get more hours in businesses and companies and aspire for partnership or whatever the highest level C-suite levels are, because they are just challenged if they want to have families, because not everyone wants to have families. And then we have to look at those women economic empowerment policies and reduce the barriers around economic opportunity. And these tie in quite closely with what I was saying a little earlier on gender, women's rights, women and children's rights. And, you know, there are several things that I can talk to, but it's essentially just making sure that you're aware of these gender biases that have existed for centuries, you know, and stereotypes that are there. And when you're aware of those gender biases, they could be unconscious biases, then you can start to actively you know, be aware of the decisions that you make and if they are inclusive in gender and other vulnerable groups.
Speaking at the Global Leaders Meeting on 27 September 2015, the then Vice President of Botswana said, "I wish to reaffirm Botswana's unwavering commitment to the achievement." People think that we're just going to be talking, you know, economy. Yeah, we will.
Right.
But I think these issues are very important, as you've been fighting for this for a long time, for sure. I know, you know. So he said that I wish to reaffirm Botswana's unwavering commitment to the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment. Obviously, we are not here to talk about, you know, the president, because this whole thing is about collaboration. But my question to you is, has the situation changed at least a bit since then? Because I believe if we can get this thing right, it is monumental and essential to economic or to socio-economic, political and cultural development, right? I remember you talking about how you can talk about eradicating poverty without essentially empowering women.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I stand by those words. I still stand by those words. You can't talk about poverty reduction, inequalities without talking about women and young people. And that's mainly because the face, I mean, the numbers, they show that women are the face of poverty and inequalities. And they are dealing, you know, we have a lot of female-headed households here that are living under poverty or that are vulnerable to poverty. And if we are going to deal with poverty, then we need to start thinking about specifically women economic empowerment programs and ensure that we bring them on board. And it's general knowledge that the multiplier of empowering, the multiplier effect of empowering a woman is far greater than the multiplier effect of empowering a man. And this is well documented. It's not a sexist statement. And if you do so, then you know first that those that are heavily indebted, that are impoverished, then they will be able to move out of the living under poverty group, and then hopefully move under the vulnerable to poverty and to a higher level of low income and moving on to middle income, because that is really what we should be aspiring to.
You said servant leadership is an African concept, where one is deep rooted in compassion, purpose, and integrity. Yeah, I like that. But I want you to expand on it, because the problem we have in Africa, we have these self-serving so-called leaders who are caught up in amassing wealth, like silencing the populace, instead of serving and creating wealth for them and listening. So I have been disappointed by a lot of African leaders. So to me, the servant leadership reminds me of this scripture that says, love your neighbor as yourself. I'm sorry I had to go off on this one, but can you? Yeah.
It's really something that I can't explain in 2 minutes, because I decided to study leadership quite a long time ago, and when I came across servant leadership, I thought this is the kind of leadership that I want, and I started noticing it quite often when I go home in Dikhosi, in your tribesmen and so forth, and I realized that this want and need to serve people. It's not a servant leadership that has been crafted in the UK or wherever, but this is something that has been implemented in our own soils and has been a part of our culture for a very long time. But then this greed started, the need to put oneself before the people. But I still believe that the fundamentals of who we are as African leaders, pre-independence, you have stories of Nanaya Asantewa, of women in Angola, in Ethiopia, that put people before themselves and risked their lives in order to ensure that there was some sort of freedom, or that there was no colonization. And then you have those during the time for political revolution that once again put themselves on the line for the greater good of the people. And so I believe that is where we're coming from. That is the leadership that we need, especially now that we are on the verge of an economic revolution, or desperately need one. We need to be more economically independent. Then we need to really go back to the fundamentals and principles of servant leadership, so we can all move together in unison, and we can create the impact that we want.
Illuminating, interesting. I
but
love it.
It's a long story, and I've had these conversations with some of my friends for forever, and we have very interesting debates over, was Kwame Nkrumah self-serving? There are all these questions that are interesting. Well, can you really argue that he was serving Ghana first, or was he self-serving? He was an egomaniac. There are all these questions that come up, and it's up for debate. But I believe that our African leadership is servant.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I remember, I did an interview with this guy. We were talking Pan-Africanism, and we mentioned Kwame Nkrumah. And then, the topic of leadership came, and what you just said popped up. So,
Yeah.
now let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the African economy. I was talking to someone yesterday or a couple of days ago about how African Americans are the hardest hit out
Right.
here, and recovering from the recession is an uphill battle because of the already existing socioeconomic uh,
Uh,
issues caused by systemic racism. But in Africa,
right.
we also have our own pre-existing socioeconomic hardships, right? And now the
Yeah.
pandemic has amplified those disparities. How do we recover, Bohol? And I want you to consider that at the rebirthing the global economy to deliver sustainable development. You talked about the external and domestic financing. I think you touched a little bit on this earlier. What kind of financing and policies do our developing countries need to fight and move forward from the ever developing status?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, the impact to Africa as a continent economically has been a lot worse than on the health crises. As you know,
Mhm.
everyone has had the health crises first, and then they had the economic crisis, and then the humanitarian crisis.
Right.
And for us, it started with the economic, as countries, were quickly trying to prevent the health crisis because, as you know, we do not have the infrastructure, or it's not that good. And if COVID was to come here full force, then we will certainly be in trouble. And you can see it happening in South Africa, where it's quite scary for us as a neighbor. And you're seeing all these pictures of what is an attempted PPE in Zimbabwe and, other African countries. And so the impact at this particular moment is a growth contraction, is an expected growth contraction from what was initially to be a 3.6% growth in Sub-Saharan Africa to a potentially to a negative 2% in 2020. And here we're in Botswana, we're actually talking about a potential minus 13 growth, and those are quite scary figures if you think about it, because it means that the big sectors in the economy are going to be affected. So we're already seeing it with mining. About 3 months or so of no production in diamonds, and if we do not sell diamonds, then we're in trouble. And similarly with
Right.
tourism. With tourism as well, and particularly the informal sector. So the extraction industries are badly hit in the continent, and this is something that's widespread, and they will be a lot worse hit than those that are in more of the services and agricultural sectors. And for the informal sector, which is really quite sad, is the majority of this population is vulnerable to poverty. It's either poor or vulnerable to poverty. And if there is no intervention, then we will see about 27 million or so people in the continent go back into being under extreme poverty, and that is a worrying figure. And in Botswana in particular, we're looking at about 1/3 of the population that is vulnerable, that is either poor or vulnerable to poverty. So you can do your numbers. If we do not, put forward stimulus policies and packages now to try to circumvent any of these challenges, then we're going to have a much bigger issue later on with people that are now dependent on social welfare programs and burgeoning the fiscus that is actually under a lot of stress in this particular moment. So we need to look at how we need to finance that particular stimulus and where it needs to be used, because we need to ensure that it's being used for productive purposes. and not just being spent willy-nilly. Because if it is not for productive purposes, then it will not have any. There will not be any return on investment. So areas of finance and potential areas of financing is within the domestic capital markets. And yes, I spoke about this during the UN SG's roundtable. Looking domestically, supporting our capital markets, ensuring that we are also boosting the financial sector, because it will also be under stress. And potentially sometimes maybe for countries like Botswana, it would be cheaper to borrow domestically, reducing that exchange rate risk. Exchange rate risk amongst others, rather than going to borrow from the IMF and so forth. But there are opportunities that are already in place, and I want to read this part of my notes. Part of my notes that we need to look at the IMF and the World Bank for a debt standstill and debt relief programs. So ensuring that, some of the interest rates that are due in 2020 are either, the debt is being restructured and they are deferred to next year or something of the sort. And I understand that actually the ECA has negotiated for a debt service suspension. And this is something that African countries should really take advantage of in order for them to have some sort of liquidity, some sort of relief, in order to refocus resources where it is most important now. Again, it's not just to have debt suspension for you to go back to continue doing things as normal, but it's in order to inject that finance, that extra liquidity into things that can help us build back better.
So, Bogolo, why is technology key to Africa's future development? And if it is really the key to socio-economic growth, perhaps COVID situation will help speed up the process, right? Please talk about this, citing some major problems within specific sectors that the internet can solve, and also talk about how technology can be an instrumental accelerator in breaking the cycle of inequality and poverty in countries like South Africa. That's if you can. Which are still suffering from the vicious dark past. Because I know this is too broad, so you can just...
Yeah. It is quite broad. Instead of just focusing on digitalization, I want to talk about, what it means to bounce back and to build back better for the continent. And I've already talked about the stimulus package going towards productive sectors. And I want to give an example in that particular area that we're talking about, ensuring that we're focusing on industrial development in our countries in order to be ready to benefit from the AFCFTA when it kicks off. And that essentially needs for governments to be deliberate about which sectors it is that they want to help grow, which sectors it is that they want to help invest in, because there will not be any organic industry development. And this is something that, we used to talk about a lot last year, asking for a budget to develop. Do you remember what Bedu was in the 90s? Remogai had this program of Bedu, and when I was minister, I really wanted to resuscitate Bedu under the industrial upscaling program. And what was so unfortunate was that there was no budget for it, and we tried so hard to ask for an extra budget to resuscitate and to bring in new sectors, because I think that diversification really needs targeted implementation. You need to finance it. You need to be willing to finance it, to provide incentives, and to provide mentorship and extra support for it to work. But this time for 2020, we are fortunate, and so are other countries, that we're looking at the stimulus package. We are forced to look at the stimulus package, and we might as well put the money in those sectors because it would be more of a long-term investment rather than a short-term investment. And this will actually help us in reducing the level of economic scarring that can happen. And it's also important to bring in the digitalization at this point, because I remember when I was part of this high-level panel on digital cooperation, when we would talk about digitalization in the continent, it would seem like, no, we're not ready. We want to talk more about other infrastructure. But COVID is showing us that it is important for us to start investing in ICT infrastructure as well. We're not saying move away from investing in water and in power, because that is important, but we also have to bring in ICT infrastructure. And we have at many times challenged even the multilateral DFIs to look at how much they are willing to put into ICT infrastructure. Because according to UNCTAD, at the moment, only 4% of what's available with multilateral DFIs is towards ICT infrastructure, and only 1% is towards policy of ICT development. And I think that absolutely needs to change, because we once again shouldn't be left behind. When we were given a crisis, we should use it and we should bounce back.
I want to point out something, because you already talked about this, but if you can sort of kind of add something to it, because only 24% of Sub-Saharan, Africans have access to electricity. And we can't talk about technology if we don't have, electricity. We know that Kenya leads Africa at the rate it is electrifying its population. Can you talk about how energy plays a huge role in digitization and transformation of growing economy? I mean, you already talked a little bit about that,
Well, I think a simple answer to that is when you look at GDP figures and you look at sectoral, if water and power are negative, then all sectors will be reduced. All sectors' growth rates will be reduced. That's the impact that the utilities have on the growth of the broader economy. So it's very important, and we need to invest in that. I'm going to try to start giving you I'm going to try to give you very short answers from now on.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, we love it, because you are basically educating us. I love it. Can you shed a light on why countries like Botswana do not go hard on renewable energy, solar, which Africa has in abundance?
I feel like you want to get me in trouble, but
no, you can give a short answer.
There are issues. No, there are issues around regulatory environments that need to be put in place. And I think we were a little slow in moving in the green technology and solar spaces, because we had already heavily invested so much in coal. So all of the attention was to try to ensure that coal space that was overly invested in functions, because how else do you explain investing 3 billion bula or something of the sort in something that tomorrow you want to ditch and move to something else? So I think that's what the focus was at that particular time. But I understand. I was talking to one of my clients beginning of this week. Last week, Friday. I was talking to one of my clients last week, Friday, and they've been given a license, and they're already ready to work on that 1 megawatt. It's small, but they have plans of making it a lot bigger. And I understand that the policy space is also changing. So knock on wood, it's necessary for us to provide cheaper, affordable electricity in order for us to really realize the transformation dream. I used to say last year that the worst for me is not being stagnant. It's that if we do not move quick enough, there will be an economic stress that will make us to regress. And that would be the worst case scenario that we shouldn't find ourselves in.
First of all, a lot of people want to understand the nature of African Continental Free Trade Area,
Right.
and how it's going to improve Africa's economy. Secondly, how will it help, countries that have minerals such as coltan, because sometimes we talked a lot about Apple amassing a lot of wealth because it's buying, cotton from some countries in Africa, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But even though, because we know that like in June, Apple became the first US company to hit 1.5 trillion in market value.
Right.
And mainly because of the cotton that is getting somewhere in Africa. So I don't know how the African Continental Free Trade Area can help with that. But first, you can just illuminate us, on the nature of the continental free trade. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the AFCFTA is to assist us trade better amongst ourselves in the continent, and to enable a swift movement of our goods and services. And I don't think if you remember what Vera somewhere, who's at the ECA,
No, I remember.
about value creation in the continent, because it's not just about the movement of goods, but there's a phase two that looks at the investment protocol. So how can we bring in more investment, incentivize investment even within the continent to ensure that we are creating value for products like those, and that they do not leave the continent in raw form, and that we are able to add value within the continent, benefit from that value before we export it. So that's some of the things that I included in the AFCFTA.
Yeah.
And the way I look at it, is if we implement it now, then we can benefit from unlocking industries such as pharma, the PPEs,
Right.
including food,
Right.
because some of the food comes from as far as Australia. The maize comes from Australia and South Africa and so forth. And we can actually create, and trade amongst ourselves and grow from just the meager 12% that we're actually of intra-African trade to something that is a lot more worthy.
Okay, good. I don't know where your headphones. It seems like something
You
is
can't
happening.
hear me.
Yeah, something is happening with your headphones.
Okay, I know what is happening. My technology is failing.
Okay, no, that's good. That's much better. Okay, we got only 2 questions left, Bogolo. Talk about why African countries cannot afford to adopt protectionism as an economic measure.
I think it's not just about African countries themselves. First of all, I spoke about the intra-African trade that is at 12%. It's not good, and we can do better. And we cannot afford protectionism when the whole world is moving towards protectionism. And we have to be to start off as being our own keepers. I see the regional economic centers and communities as the basis for us to work towards multilateralism. So we need to start with our neighbors, ensure that we're trading fairly and we're negotiating fairly in order to move our products. I mean, you can't, I'll give you an example. Sugar in South African sugar is more exported and marketed towards Europe at, of course, a very nicely premium price than it is to Southern Africans. And we need it here for a whole lot of our manufacturing. So we really need to have fair trade and to look more at regional industrialization and how we can work towards achieving those ideals vis-a-vis just looking at serving the external market.
Why is doctorship so important to you? You know, and again, who's your role model?
Right. But before I talk about my chip, I just remembered something on protectionism that I wanted to talk about. That particularly during COVID, we should avoid protectionism, even in especially in the G20 countries, because I remember 2009, 2010, they reached an agreement that they were not going to restrict investments and capital leaving their own countries, and that they will allow the free flow of capital. And I think it's very important for us. And I think it's important that once again we look for that kind of an agreement that ensures free flow of capital, because it is already estimated, OECD, UNCTAD, whoever is estimating that FDI will go down by 40%. So if FDI globally, and especially from the G20 countries, is expected to contract by at least 40%, then we most certainly need to start looking internally, domestically in Botswana and within African countries, and to our neighbors to try to incentivize some of that capital that maybe Botswana and Lilo Nasoni are keeping in the US and need to bring back to the continent for us to invest in building back better.
Right. You know, now you yeah, but you reminded me because I was going to ask you, you know, how can, you know, people in the, you know, Africans in the diaspora, you know, contribute to Africa's economy, you know, so now it's coming back to my mind because you just touched on it, you know.
Bring your money back. Bring your money back. But I am well aware that there's a lot more that governments need to do, and we're lobbying, some of my clients, we're lobbying on this, that we need more transparency. We need to see how investments will be protected. And this is a challenge for African governments that needs for them to take up to ensure that investors will be protected in order for the money to come back into the continent. And in order for those towards our development. So my advice, or really my challenge, is that you bring your money back to the continent, and to also bring back you know, your skills into the continent, because they are very needed.
Right. Now to the question of market.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. I have the greatest respect for her, and the greatest admiration for her, and she has been one of my pillars of support and strength. And you know, I honestly cannot thank her enough for the guidance that she has given me. I forced her to adopt me many years ago, and you know, as the very gracious leader that she is, she has given me the space for me to learn from her, to listen to her amazing stories of how Botswana was founded, and all the suffering that happened, and the decision making that they needed to do, and how things are just so different from, you know, when they started and when they started working to how we are now. And I think women like her absolutely need to be given what is due to them, and they have sacrificed so much. She worked for 25 years as minister in this country, And many don't know that she was the Minister of Minerals when the De Beers deal was negotiated. Then she was Minister of Water, and she bought the first drill machine in Botswana. And this picture that she has of her standing next to this drill machine, and she was very proud that they were going to finally be able to provide a lot of people with water. And what we remember is that she then became Minister of Education for the longest time, and many of my generation remember her during that time. And other things, and for other things being named after her, but I will not talk about it.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, but you know, she is one woman that I think if all young people, particularly young women, take time to just go to archives and read a little bit more about her, they will be inspired and amazed at the great work that was done in Botswana in the beginning. So I love her.
That's good. That's great. Let's talk about your last word, a message of hope.
Well, I think first is more of a challenge to all of us to do what's right.
Right.
To do what's right and to not shy away from doing what's right. And leadership, contrary to what people have said, I believe it's youthful, and it's female leadership as well is African. And so if you're a young person and you're a woman and want to participate in these spaces, you want to be a leader, you want to be at the table, just, you know, bring yourself through and do what is necessary, and do not fear anyone, do not fear intimidation. Do what is right and what you believe in. And if you know that you're going to bring the impact, and you're all about that transformational and consequential leadership. And I want to just say, I think it's possible. It is possible for us to deliver on the promises of a changed and improved economy, but it absolutely needs for all of us to participate, particularly so right now during this COVID season, by just being responsible. Start off by being responsible for yourself, and then be responsible for the ones that you live with, the ones that you love. Wash your hands, wear your mask, social distance, physical distance, and just make sure that we are working towards getting back to a better economic place. Because if we don't take care of ourselves health-wise and mentally, then we will not be able to get there economically. And my dream is for us to be economically independent, is for us to have the economic revolution. And I believe that you are the generation for us to do it.
I love that. That's wonderful.